Derek slammed the will down on the table and pointed at Maya like she was something that had crawled in from outside. "She gets the barn," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "That falling apart, rat-infested barn that hasn't been used in 15 years. He looked around at the cousins, at the aunts, at the family attorney sitting stiffly behind his desk, and he laughed. Not a polite laugh. A long, ugly, open-mouthed laugh that filled every corner of the room. Maya sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the window behind the attorney's head. She said nothing. She did not cry. She did not defend herself. She simply reached out, picked up the single key that had been placed in front of her, a small, rusted thing on a plain ring, closed her fingers around it, and held it. "Before we go any further, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Now, let's begin." Maya Calloway was 35 years old when her grandfather, Harold Calloway, died on a Tuesday morning in early October. She had been the one to find him, sitting in his armchair by the window the way he always sat, his coffee cup still warm on the side table beside him. She had driven 40 minutes to check on him because he hadn't answered the phone for 2 days. The rest of the family lived closer. None of them had gone. Harold had raised 3 children, collected 2 divorces, and outlived 1 son. He had worked the same 40-acre property in rural Tennessee for most of his adult life. Not as a wealthy man, not as a man anyone would have called distinguished, but as a man who showed up every single day and did what needed doing. Maya had loved him with the kind of love that doesn't require explanation. She had spent every summer of her childhood on that property, following him from fence to fence, learning which boards were rotting, which posts needed resetting, which corners of the land had stories buried in them. The rest of the grandchildren came at Christmas. Maya came in June, July, and August, every single year without being asked. So when the attorney read the will aloud in that small office in Clarksville and Derek started laughing, Maya already knew what was coming. She had known for 23 years. Harold had called her inside one August afternoon when she was 12 years old. She remembered the way the light fell through the barn door in long yellow bars, the smell of old wood and dry earth. He had sat her down on an overturned crate and looked at her with those pale grey eyes of his for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Maya, I'm going to tell you something, and you're going to carry it until it's time. Can you do that?" She had said yes without knowing what she was agreeing to. He told her about the barn floor. He told her about the containers. He told her about 40 years of careful, quiet putting away. And then he said, "When I'm gone, that barn is yours. Don't let anyone rush you. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. And don't tell a soul." She had kept that secret through high school, through college, through a marriage and a divorce of her own, through 12 years of working as a middle school history teacher in Nashville. She had never told her mother. She had never told her best friend. She had carried it alone, the way Harold had carried everything, quietly, without complaint, without any need for the world to know. Back in the attorney's office, Derek had finished laughing and was now leaning back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man who had already won. He had walked away with the house, the vehicle, the savings accounts, and the furniture. His sister Renee had the antique collection and a parcel of the back acreage. 2 other cousins had split a life insurance policy. Maya had the barn, a structure valued, according to county records, at approximately $4,000. Derek looked at her across the table and said, "You need money to fix that thing up, you let me know. I'll give you $8,000 for the whole property. That's more than it's worth and you know it." Maya looked at him for the first time since the reading began. "I'll think about it," she said. She drove home that night with the rusted key in the cup holder and the windows down, and she cried for the first grandfather she had lost. Not the barn, not the family, not Derek's laughing face. Just Harold, just the man who had trusted her, just the weight of something being over. Then she wiped her face, pulled into her driveway, and started making a list. She took 3 weeks. She wasn't in a hurry, and she wasn't going to be rushed. She called a contractor named Bill Sherwood, who had done work for a colleague of hers in Nashville, a quiet man in his late 50s who came with good references and a reputation for keeping his mouth shut. She told him she needed a concrete floor broken up and a new one poured in an old barn in Clarksville. She didn't tell him why. She told him to start in the northeast corner and work west. She told him to call her immediately if he found anything unusual. The family found out she'd hired a contractor the way families always find out things, through someone who shouldn't have been talking. A neighbor of Grandpa Harold's mentioned it to his daughter, who mentioned it to Renee at church, who called Derek before the Sunday service was even finished. Derek called Maya that same afternoon. "What exactly are you doing to that barn?" he said. He didn't say hello first. "Renovating it," Maya said. "For what?" "A studio. I'm thinking about getting into ceramics." There was a long pause on the line. Then Derek laughed again, not as loud as before, but the same flavor of contempt. "Ceramics," he said. "You're going to drive 40 minutes twice a week to make pottery in a barn." "That's the plan." "Maya," his voice shifted, smooth and reasonable now, the way it always did when he wanted something. "I'll go to 10,000. For the whole thing, you don't have to deal with contractors or permits or any of it. You sign the deed over, you walk away clean, you buy yourself something nice." "I appreciate the offer," she said, "but I'm going to pass." He hung up without saying goodbye. Bill Sherwood started work on a Wednesday. Maya drove out each morning that week and stood in the doorway of the barn while Bill and his two-man crew worked the concrete. It was slow going. The floor was old, but it had been laid thick. Harold had done the work himself, and Harold did not do anything halfway. The crew used a jackhammer for the first day and a half, breaking the slab into manageable sections, pulling them up by hand, stacking the pieces outside. The barn filled with dust and noise. Maya watched every inch of it. On the second afternoon, Bill stopped working and walked to where she stood in the doorway. He wiped his face with a cloth and looked at her with the steady, unhurried expression of a man who has been doing construction long enough to have seen a few things. "Found something in the northeast section," he said. 3 of them so far, steel containers sealed, about the size of a big toolbox each. Maya nodded slowly. "How deep?" "Maybe 14 inches down, set in sand below the slab. Deliberate." "Can you bring them up without damaging them?" "Already did the first one," he said. "It's in the corner over there." She walked past him into the barn and crouched beside it. It was exactly as Harold had described, military-grade steel, sealed with a rubber gasket, the lid secured with 2 latches. The outside was dusty and cold to the touch. She put both hands on it and felt the weight of 23 years of keeping a promise, and her throat went so tight she had to breathe through her nose for a moment before she could stand back up. "Leave them sealed," she said. "Bring up everything you find. Don't open any of them." Bill looked at her for a moment. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and went back to work. By the end of the 3rd day, they had found 7 containers in total, 4 in the northeast section, 2 along the western wall, 1 buried near the center of the floor, beneath a section of concrete that had been poured on top of older concrete. A second layer Harold must have added sometime in the late 90s. All of them sealed, all of them intact. Maya loaded them into her truck herself. She thanked Bill, paid him in full plus a bonus, and asked him to get started on the new floor as soon as the ground was ready. She drove back to Nashville with 7 sealed steel containers in the bed of her truck and called no one. She opened the first container alone, at her kitchen table, on a Thursday night with a glass of water she never touched. The latches were stiff, but they gave. The rubber gasket released with a soft, pressurized exhale, like the container had been holding its breath all these years waiting for her. Inside, packed in cloth and sealed in individual plastic sleeves, were gold coins. American eagles mostly, some maple leafs, a few older pieces she didn't immediately recognize. She counted slowly, setting each sleeve on the table in a row. And when she was done, she sat back in her chair and pressed both hands flat against the wood and breathed. She opened the second container, Maury coins, and beneath them 3 stacks of silver bars wrapped in brown paper, each one stamped with a weight mark. She opened the third and found the same. By the time she had worked through all 7 containers, Her kitchen table was covered edge to edge, and she had run out of room and started stacking things on the counter. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in her kitchen until 4 in the morning with Harold's inventory in front of her. Because there was an inventory, of course there was, folded inside the 7th container in Harold's tight. Careful handwriting, every item listed, every approximate date of purchase noted in pencil, and she read it 3 times. The next morning she called an appraiser in Nashville named Catherine Ose, who came with credentials from 2 national dealers and a reputation for discretion. Maya had found her through a colleague who collected rare books and trusted her completely. Catherine came to the house, spent 4 hours at the kitchen table, and when she looked up from her work, her expression was composed, but her eyes were not. Based on current spot prices and the numismatic value of several of these older pieces, Catherine said carefully, you're looking at a conservative floor of $410,000. Depending on how you move the silver and which coins go to auction versus dealer sale, the ceiling is closer to 480. Maya nodded. She had her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she had made 20 minutes ago and not yet drunk. There are also 3 pieces in the 5th container, Catherine continued, sliding a sleeve across the table, that I'd want a second opinion on before I gave you a final number. These could push things higher. How much higher? I don't want to speculate until I'm certain, but meaningfully higher. Maya thanked her, scheduled a follow-up, and walked her to the door. Then she stood in her hallway for a long time looking at nothing in particular. She thought about Harold sitting in that barn in the August heat, looking at a 12-year-old girl and deciding she was the one worth trusting. She thought about what it costs a person to be quiet for 23 years. She thought it hadn't cost her very much at all, because keeping Harold's secret had never felt like a burden. It had felt like being chosen. She called a real estate attorney the following week. Not about the containers, about the land. Because the barn sat on 4 acres Harold had deeded separately from the main property, a parcel that Derek and the others had not thought to value because the barn itself looked worthless. But those 4 acres sat at the edge of a county road that had been rezoned for commercial development 18 months earlier. Maya had checked. She had checked the moment she inherited the property, before the will reading was even finished, because she was a woman who did her research. The attorney's name was Patricia Walls, and she had been practicing real estate law in Middle Tennessee for 27 years. She looked over the deed and the zoning maps and the recent comparable sales in the area, and she looked at Maya across her desk and said, "You have a developer who has been quietly acquiring parcels on this road for the last 2 years. He's paid between $200,000 and $300,000 per acre for every parcel he's gotten so far. Your 4 acres, with road frontage and the new zoning designation, should come in between 1.1 and 1.3 million. Maya set her pen down on the notepad she'd been writing on. When can we reach out to him? As soon as you'd like, Patricia said. Monday, Maya said. The offer came in at $1.2 million. Maya countered at 1.25. The developer accepted within 48 hours. Patricia told her later that he had been trying to get Harold to sell that parcel for 3 years, and Harold had refused every approach without explanation. Maya thought about that and smiled. The closing happened on a Friday afternoon in early December, 14 weeks after the will reading, where Derek had laughed at her across a conference table. Maya signed the papers in Patricia's office, shook hands, and drove home in the early dark with the heat on and the radio off. That evening, she made a donation in Harold Calloway's name to the Clarksville Historical Society, a gift substantial enough that they called her back within the hour to make sure the number was correct. She told them it was. She asked that a small plaque be placed in the reading room. They said it would be their honor. She was in bed by 10 o'clock. She slept better than she had in months. Derek found out on a Tuesday. She never learned exactly how, probably the county property transfer records, which are public, and which Derek had apparently thought to check when the barn renovation started attracting more attention than a ceramics hobby warranted. He called her at 7:45 in the morning while she was getting ready for school. You sold it, he said. The laugh was completely gone from his voice. What was there instead was something flatter and uglier. You sold that property for over $1 million. Good morning, Derek. How? He said it like a single hard syllable. How is that barn worth $1 million? It was a wreck. I had it assessed after the reading. The whole parcel came in at 40,000. How are you walking away with $1 million? The zoning changed 18 months ago, Maya said. Commercial designation on that road. There's a developer who's been buying up parcels. Patricia Walls handled the sale if you want to look up the records. There was silence on the line. She could hear him breathing. And the contractor, he said slowly. What did he find in the floor? Maya tucked the phone between her ear and shoulder and picked up her car keys from the counter. Old concrete, she said. Bill poured a new floor. It looks great. Very clean. Maya, his voice had changed again, lower now, almost careful. If Grandpa left something in that barn, something valuable that belongs to the whole family, you understand that? That is family property. Harold left me the barn, she said. The deed was clear. The attorney was present. Everything was legal and documented. I'm going to talk to my lawyer. That's your right, she said. Have a good day, Derek. She ended the call, dropped the phone in her bag, and drove to school. She taught 3 periods of American history that day. Her students were studying the Great Depression, how ordinary people had survived it, what they had sacrificed, what methods they had used to protect the small things they had managed to hold on to. She stood at the front of the classroom and talked about it with more feeling than usual, and a few of the kids noticed and asked her about it afterward. She just smiled and told them that history has a way of paying forward. Derek did call a lawyer. The lawyer reviewed the will, the deed, the property transfer, and the terms of the inheritance and told Derek there was no actionable claim. Harold had been of sound mind. The will had been properly witnessed and filed. The barn and the land had been Maya's to do with as she chose. Derek apparently disputed this assessment with 2 more attorneys over the following month, both of whom told him the same thing. She knew this because Renee called her in January, not to fight but to apologize, quietly, without Derek knowing, and mentioned it in passing. He's humiliated, Renee said. He keeps saying Grandpa blindsided him. Grandpa didn't blindside anyone, Maya said. Grandpa just knew who he could trust. There was a long pause on Renee's end of the line. I should have come to check on him, she said finally. When he wasn't answering the phone, I should have been the one to go. Yeah, Maya said, not unkindly. You should have. She didn't say anything more than that. She didn't need to. Maya took a leave of absence from teaching in the spring. She had thought about it for years, the idea of doing something with the history degree she'd never fully used, something that felt more like Harold's kind of work, something built with her hands and meant to last. She bought a piece of land outside Nashville, modest acreage, a good well, a small house that needed work. She started fixing it herself, the way Harold had taught her methodically, without rushing, one board at a time. She had the money now. More importantly, she had always had the patience. She kept the rusted key on her keychain. She had no reason to keep it anymore. The barn was gone, the floor was poured clean, the land belonged to someone else. But she kept it anyway because it was the first thing Harold had given her, in a room full of people who were laughing, on a day when the world had decided she had gotten nothing. She would keep it for the rest of her life. Some things you carry not because they are heavy, but because they remind you exactly how light everything else feels by comparison. If you've made it this far, you already know the quietest people in the room are often carrying the most. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. We bring you powerful stories like this every single week, and we don't want you to miss a single one. Drop a comment below and tell us, would you have kept that secret for 23 years? We'll see you in the next story.